A white waitress tips an entire glass of red wine over a pregnant black woman's head at Kingston's most exclusive restaurant. The woman sits frozen as crimson liquid streams down her $2,800 maternity dress. Then she speaks 5 words that will change everything. "You just assaulted the governor's wife." What happens in the next 7 days will teach an entire nation the difference between revenge and redemption. It was 8:29 p.m. on a humid Thursday evening when everything changed at the Velvet Palm. Amber Robinson, 7 months pregnant and glowing in a flowing yellow maternity dress, sat alone at a corner table overlooking Kingston's shimmering coastline. She'd been waiting for 22 minutes, her fingers gently tracing circles over her belly as she checked her phone. Her husband, Governor Nathaniel Robinson, was running late from a legislative session. Around her, other diners whispered and stared, some with admiration at her elegance, others with thinly veiled resentment at her commanding presence in Jamaica's most exclusive restaurant. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach when she felt the baby kick, as if sensing her mother's growing discomfort from the hostile glances. That's when Ashley Tedford, a 27-year-old white waitress with bitterness carved into every line of her face, made her move. Without warning, Ashley tipped an entire glass of red wine directly onto Amber's head. The crimson liquid cascaded down Amber's face, soaking through her carefully styled hair, streaming down her neck, and staining her $2,800 maternity dress. The wine pooled on the white tablecloth before dripping onto the marble floor in steady, devastating drops. Ashley leaned in close, her voice dripping with venom disguised as false apology. "Oh my, how clumsy of me. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a restaurant that's more suited to your background. This establishment has certain standards." The entire restaurant went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every wine glass froze mid-sip. Every fork hung suspended in the air. Amber sat there, 7 months pregnant, wine dripping from her hair onto her ruined designer gown. Her hands trembled as she felt the cold liquid seeping through to her skin, and for a terrifying moment, she felt the baby stop moving. The humiliation burned deeper than the wine's acidity ever could, but underneath it was something far more powerful, a mother's protective fury. But instead of breaking down, Amber's eyes flashed with controlled rage. She remained seated for what felt like an eternity, wine still cascading from her dress, and locked eyes with Ashley. Her voice came out steady, barely above a whisper, but carrying a weight that made every person in that restaurant lean forward to hear. "You just poured that drink on the governor's wife." Then something shifted in the room. As those words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate, a massive figure materialized from the shadows near the entrance. Tony James, 6 feet, 4 inches, 240 pounds of muscle, wearing a tailored black suit and an expression that could freeze lava, moved through the restaurant with lethal purpose. His hand instinctively went to his hip, where his service weapon rested, as he assessed the situation. When he saw Amber's condition, the wine-stained dress, the trembling in her hand, the devastated look she was trying so hard to hide, his jaw clenched so tightly that veins pulsed in his neck. "Mrs. Robinson," Tony said, his voice deadly calm as he gently helped Amber to her feet, his massive hand steadying her elbow with surprising tenderness. "The car is ready." Amber looked back at Ashley one final time, then at the restaurant full of frozen faces, her voice breaking slightly as she said 5 words that would echo through Jamaica's news cycle for weeks. "Some people need to learn respect." Before we dive, if you want to see how this racist waitress's world completely crumbles when the full weight of the governor's office descends on her. Subscribe and keep watching, because what happens in the next 7 minutes will shock you. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever witnessed someone abuse their position to humiliate someone they thought was powerless? Because Ashley Tedford just discovered that assumption can destroy everything. Ashley stood frozen behind Amber's table, the empty wine glass still in her hand, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Tony James escorted Amber toward a black SUV with government plates. For a split second, just a flicker, Ashley's smug satisfaction wavered. Her hands began to shake slightly as she set down the glass, and she couldn't quite meet the eyes of her co-workers who stood nearby with expressions of pure horror. "Finally put her in her place," Ashley whispered to Maria, another server, but her voice cracked on the last word. Deep in her chest, a tiny voice whispered that something felt terribly, catastrophically wrong about what she'd just done. But Ashley Morrison had no idea that outside, in that government vehicle, her entire future was being decided. Ashley Tedford was 27 years old, broke and drowning. Once a promising hospitality student with dreams of managing her own restaurant, she now worked endless double shifts at the Velvet Palm just to keep the lights on in the cramped one-bedroom apartment she shared with her ailing father. 3 months earlier, she'd been passed over for the assistant manager position, a promotion that would have doubled her salary and finally given her breathing room. That rejection had been festering inside her like an infected wound, poisoning every interaction, every smile she had to fake for customers who seemed to have everything she'd been denied. But this wasn't Ashley's first act of cruelty disguised as an accident. For 8 months, she'd been targeting well-dressed black patrons, making subtle digs disguised as professional concern, assuming they were all faking wealth they didn't possess or didn't deserve. Each time she did it, she felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, as if dragging someone else down could somehow lift her out of her own misery. And management at the Velvet Palm? They turned a blind eye because Ashley knew exactly how to play the victim when complaints were filed. Tears streaming, voice trembling, claiming she was being unfairly targeted by entitled customers who wanted free meals. What Ashley didn't know was that her pattern had been noticed, documented, reported to corporate 3 separate times. And now, she'd just assaulted the one woman in Jamaica who had the power, the resources, and the moral authority to ensure Ashley's cruelty would finally face consequences. Ashley Tedford stood motionless at table 7, staring at the crimson stain spreading across the white tablecloth like spilled blood. Around her, the Velvet Palm had erupted into whispered chaos, diners leaning across tables, phones emerging from purses, the maitre d' rushing toward her with panic etched across his face. But Ashley heard none of it. Her mind had gone eerily quiet, suspended in that dangerous space between triumph and dread. She deserved it, Ashley told herself, gripping the empty wine glass so tightly her knuckles went white. Walking in here like she owns the place, with that designer dress and those diamond earrings, acting like she's better than everyone else. But even as the justifications formed, Ashley's hands wouldn't stop trembling. "Ashley, what the hell did you just do?" Marco, the floor manager, grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the kitchen. His face had gone pale, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Do you have any idea who that was?" "Some entitled woman who needed to be taken down a peg," Ashley muttered, but her voice came out hollow, unconvincing even to her own ears. She pulled her arm free and smoothed down her apron with shaking fingers. She was sitting there for almost half an hour, taking up a prime table during our busiest night, acting like... That was Amber Robinson, Marco's words hit like a physical blow. The governor's wife, Ashley. The governor's pregnant wife. The kitchen door swung shut behind them with a definitive thud that seemed to echo in Ashley's suddenly hollow chest. The news didn't register at first. Couldn't register. Because surely Marco was exaggerating, trying to scare her into feeling remorse she didn't actually owe anyone. "You're lying," Ashley whispered, but she could already feel the foundation of her righteousness crumbling beneath her feet. Marco pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Within seconds, he thrust it in her face. A news article from 3 months ago. Governor Nathaniel Robinson and First Lady Amber Robinson announced pregnancy, expecting first child in December. There she was, that same woman, that same radiant face, that same yellow dress style, standing beside a distinguished man in a sharp suit outside King's House, Jamaica's seat of power. The headline practically glowed with significance. Ashley had been too blind, too consumed by her own bitterness, to recognize. Ashley's legs went weak. She stumbled backward against the stainless steel prep counter, the cold metal biting through her uniform. "Oh God," she breathed. "Oh God, oh God, oh." "You need to leave," Marco hissed, glancing toward the dining room where chaos was building. "Right now. Clock out. Go home. And pray to whatever you believe in that this doesn't blow up in all our faces." But Ashley couldn't move. Her mind had begun racing backward through the evening, through the past 8 months, through every small cruelty she'd justified, every snide comment she'd disguised as professional concern. The pattern she'd convinced herself was invisible suddenly felt glaringly obvious. A trail of discriminatory breadcrumbs leading directly to this catastrophic moment. How did I become this person? The question haunted Ashley during the 30-minute bus ride home to her cramped apartment in the Meadowbrook district. She stared at her reflection in the dark window, seeing a stranger, a woman with exhaustion carved into premature lines around her eyes, bitterness pulling down the corners of her mouth, the kind of hardness that made people look away rather than engage. When had she started viewing every successful black patron as a personal insult to her own failures? Ashley knew the exact moment. She could trace it back to a single devastating day 3 months ago. She'd been working at the Velvet Palm for 2 years, slowly climbing from hostess to server to senior server. The assistant manager position had finally opened up, a role that came with a salary instead of tips, health insurance, set hours, and the financial stability that would let her afford better care for her father. She'd prepared for weeks, practiced her interview answers, researched restaurant management strategies until 2 a.m. every night. The position went to Keisha Williams, a Jamaican woman 5 years younger than Ashley, with a degree from the University of the West Indies and a natural warmth that made customers and staff alike gravitate toward her. Ashley had told herself it was reverse discrimination, that Keisha was hired to fill some invisible diversity quota, that her own qualifications had been ignored because she was white in a predominantly black country. The narrative had been so much easier than confronting the truth. Keisha was simply better qualified, more personable, more professional. That rejection had planted a seed of resentment that grew roots deep into Ashley's psyche. Every smile she had to fake at work watered it. Every bill she couldn't quite pay fertilized it. Every night she spent caring for her father while her own life slipped away, fed it, until the bitterness consumed everything good she'd once been. Ashley had been a different person 5 years ago. She'd arrived in Jamaica, fresh out of hospitality school in Toronto, full of optimism and adventure, ready to build a career in Caribbean luxury hospitality. Her father, David Tedford had moved with her, a retired construction worker who'd dreamed of spending his golden years in the sunshine rather than Canadian winters. Then came the diagnosis: early onset Parkinson's disease, aggressive and unrelenting. Within 18 months, David went from independent to requiring full-time care. His medications cost $3,200 Jamaican dollars monthly, money Ashley barely scraped together between her salary and his meager pension. His condition deteriorated steadily. The tremors, the rigidity, the cognitive decline that meant Ashley could never leave him alone for more than a few hours. She'd become his nurse, his caretaker, his entire world. And somewhere in that exhausting transformation, she'd lost herself completely. The resentment wasn't just about race, Ashley realized, as the bus lurched through Kingston's nighttime streets. It was about every person who seemed to have an easier life than hers. Every woman who could afford nice clothes without checking her bank account first. Every couple who could enjoy a romantic dinner without worrying about who was monitoring their sick parent. Every person who had the luxury of happiness while Ashley drowned in responsibility and debt. Amber Robinson, beautiful, pregnant, dignified, waiting for her powerful husband in a restaurant Ashley could never afford on her own, had simply been the most visible target for years of accumulated rage. The apartment was dark when Ashley finally stumbled through the door at 10:47 p.m. She could hear her father's labored breathing from the bedroom, the sound slightly rattling from the congestion that had been getting worse lately. She stood in the doorway, watching him sleep, and felt something crack inside her chest. "I'm so sorry." "Dad," she whispered to his unconscious form, "I think I just ruined everything." Ashley collapsed onto the threadbare couch, still in her wine-stained uniform, and pulled out her phone. Her hands shook as she opened social media, dreading what she might find, but unable to stop herself from looking. The video was already there. Posted 23 minutes ago by Kingston Foodie, a local influencer who'd been dining 3 tables away. Ashley watched in horror as her own face filled the screen, cold, calculating, deliberately tipping the wine glass over Amber's head. The audio captured every venomous word. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a restaurant that's more suited to your background." The video had 847 shares, 1,293 comments, and climbing. Ashley scrolled through the comments with mounting terror. "Disgusting racist behavior in 2025. She needs to be fired immediately." "That's the governor's wife. This woman just ended her own career." "I know exactly who this server is. Her name is Ashley Tedford, and she's been rude to my family before too. Someone get her name to the Jamaica Observer. This needs to be front-page news." Her phone began buzzing with notifications, tags, shares, messages from people she'd never met. The video was spreading like wildfire through Jamaican social media, jumping from platform to platform, each share adding fuel to the inferno consuming her life. Ashley's phone rang. Marco's name flashed on the screen. "You're terminated," he said without preamble, "effective immediately. Corporate called from Barbados. They saw the video. You're done, Ashley. Don't come back for your final check. We'll mail it. And for what it's worth, I tried to defend you to corporate for about 30 seconds before I realized there was absolutely no defense for what you did." The line went dead. Ashley sat in the darkness, her father's rattling breath the only sound, and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd done. Not just to Amber Robinson, though that was catastrophic enough, but to herself, to her father, who depended on her income, to the version of herself she'd once been, the bright-eyed hospitality student who'd believed in treating every customer with dignity and warmth. When had that girl died? When had Ashley become the kind of person who weaponized race and class as tools for petty cruelty? She thought about Amber's face in that moment after the wine hit. The shock, the humiliation, the protective hand as her man moving to her pregnant belly. Ashley had seen that gesture and felt satisfaction. She'd wanted to hurt someone, and she had. Successfully. Thoroughly. The shame was suffocating. Around 2 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep, Ashley checked the video again. It had gone viral, 47,000 views. The Jamaica Observer had picked it up. So had the Jamaica Gleaner. International Caribbean news outlets were sharing it. The hashtag Governor Wife Humiliated was trending across the region. In the comments, people were digging up her entire life, her address, her father's name, her employment history. Someone had found her old hospitality school graduation photo and posted it beside a screenshot from the video. From Promise to Prejudice, the fall of Ashley Tedford. She was being destroyed in real time, her entire identity reduced to 37 seconds of inexcusable cruelty. And the worst part? She deserved every bit of it. But what Ashley didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as she sat in her dark apartment watching her life disintegrate, was that Amber Robinson had already made a decision. Not about punishment, but about something far more complicated. And in exactly 48 hours, the real consequences would begin. The black SUV's engine purred to life as Tony James pulled away from the Velvet Palms valet circle. Through the tinted windows, Kingston's glittering nightlife blurred into streaks of gold and crimson, colors that reminded Amber too much of the wine, still soaking through her dress, still matting her carefully styled hair, still carrying the acrid smell of humiliation. She sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. The only movement was her chest rising and falling with carefully controlled breaths, the kind of deliberate breathing she'd learned during prenatal yoga classes. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. Anything to keep the tears from falling. Anything to maintain the composure that had been drilled into her since the day Nathaniel was elected governor. First ladies don't break. First ladies don't cry in public. First ladies weather storms with grace. But God, she wanted to scream. Tony's massive hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked. In the dashboard's green glow, Amber could see his jaw working, teeth grinding together with enough force to crack bone. A muscle twitched beneath his left eye, the same tell he had before he'd subdued an armed protester outside King's house last year. "Tony," Amber said quietly, her voice barely audible over the engine's hum. "Mrs. Robinson, I should have—" His voice came out strangled, thick with rage and guilt. "I was 20 feet away, 20 feet, and I let that happen to you. You couldn't have known. That's my job to know." Tony slammed his palm against the steering wheel, making Amber flinch. He immediately softened, his voice dropping to something closer to anguish. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, ma'am. But I should have been at that table with you. I should have—" "Tony?" Amber turned to look at him fully, and for the first time since leaving the restaurant, she felt the tears threatening to spill. "Please, I just need to get home." He nodded once, sharply, and pressed down on the accelerator. Amber returned her gaze to the window, watching Kingston flow past, her city, her home for the past 8 years since marrying Nathaniel. She'd grown to love Jamaica's vibrant chaos, its complex beauty. its warm embrace of her as a daughter of the Jamaican diaspora returning home. But tonight, that love felt fractured by a single act of cruelty that had cut deeper than any wine stain ever could. Her hand moved to her belly, searching for the baby's movement. Nothing. The silence terrified her more than Ashley's venom had. "Please, baby. Please move. Please be okay." 5 eternal seconds passed before she felt it. A small flutter, then a stronger kick against her palm. The relief was so profound that Amber finally let one tear escape, tracking silently down her cheek. "The baby?" Tony asked immediately, his eyes flicking toward her. "She's okay," Amber whispered, though she didn't actually know the gender yet. Somehow, she'd always felt it was a girl. "She's strong." "Like her mother," Tony said firmly. Amber didn't feel strong. She felt violated, exposed, reduced to nothing more than someone's target practice for prejudice. But she nodded anyway, because that's what First Ladies did. They absorbed the blows and transformed them into grace. As they pulled through the gates of the governor's residence, a stately colonial estate set on 3 acres of manicured grounds, Amber could see lights blazing in every window. Security personnel moved across the lawn with purpose. Nathaniel's personal aide, Marcus Chen, stood on the front steps, phone pressed to his ear, his expression grave. The storm had already begun. Nathaniel Robinson was in the study when Amber entered, still wearing her wine-stained dress. He was standing at his desk with his back to the door, one hand braced against the mahogany surface, the other holding his phone to his ear. His posture was perfectly straight, perfectly controlled. The same ramrod military bearing he'd maintained since his days as a lieutenant colonel in the Jamaica Defense Force. But Amber knew her husband. She could see the fury in the rigid set of his shoulders, in the way his free hand had curled into a fist so tight his knuckles had gone white. "I don't care what time it is, Commissioner," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying the kind of lethal calm that made seasoned politicians flinch. "I want a full incident report on my desk by 0600 hours. Witness statements, security footage from every angle, the complete employment history of every staff member present. Am I making myself clear?" A pause. "No, I am not overreacting. Someone assaulted the First Lady of Jamaica in a public establishment, my pregnant wife. So you will treat this with the gravity it deserves, or I will find a police commissioner who will." He ended the call with surgical precision and finally turned around. The moment Nathaniel saw Amber's ruined dress, the wine dried in streaks down her face, her swollen eyes that betrayed the tears she'd been holding back. Something shifted in his expression. The governor disappeared, replaced by something far more primal and protective. "Nathaniel," Amber started, but he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted the rage radiating from every inch of his body. "Who did this to you?" he asked against her hair, his voice barely more than a whisper. "A waitress. Her name is Ashley Tedford." Amber's voice finally cracked. "She poured wine on my head and told me I didn't belong there. In front of everyone. Nathaniel. Everyone saw. Then everyone will see justice." He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears with infinite care. "I promise you, Amber, this will not stand." "I don't want revenge," Amber said quickly, though part of her wasn't sure that was entirely true. "I just want—" "Respect," Nathaniel finished. "You want the respect you've earned. The respect you deserve. The respect that every person in this country deserves, regardless of who they are or what they look like." His jaw tightened. And she will learn what it means to deny someone their fundamental dignity. Before Amber could respond, Marcus knocked on the study door and entered without waiting for permission, a violation of protocol that indicated emergency. "Sir, ma'am, the video has gone viral." Marcus held up his tablet, and Amber felt her stomach drop as she saw herself on the screen, wine cascading over her head in high definition. Ashley's cruel face twisted with satisfaction. "It's been shared over 60,000 times in the last 2 hours. Governor wife humiliated is the #1 trend in Jamaica. The opposition is already drafting statements. The media is calling it a national disgrace." Nathaniel took the tablet and watched the video once, his expression growing darker with each passing second. When it finished, he handed it back to Marcus with deliberate control. "Draft a statement," he said. "The First Lady was the victim of a discriminatory attack at the Velvet Palm restaurant this evening. The incident is under investigation by the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Further details will be provided as appropriate. Keep it factual, measured. I will not have my wife's pain turned into political theater." "Yes, sir." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, there's more. People are identifying the waitress online. Her home address has been posted in multiple forums. There are already protesters gathering outside the Velvet Palm. This is escalating rapidly." "Let it escalate," Nathaniel said coldly. "Let every person in Jamaica see what happens when someone mistakes kindness for weakness." "Nathaniel," Amber warned softly, placing a hand on his arm. He looked down at her, and for a moment, the governor returned. "I won't pursue anything extrajudicial, love, but I will ensure that justice is thorough, transparent, and absolute. That woman assaulted you, humiliated you, put stress on our unborn child. She will face consequences." Back at the Velvet Palm, Ashley stood in the kitchen surrounded by co-workers whose expressions ranged from horror to disgust to fearful distance. Marco had already informed her of her termination, but she'd been told to remain on the premises until police arrived for statements. "I can't believe you actually did that," Maria, the server who'd witnessed everything, said from across the room. She wasn't even looking at Ashley anymore. None of them were. "Do you have any idea what you've done? To her? To all of us? This restaurant is finished." "I didn't know who she was," Ashley said weakly, but the excuse sounded pathetic even to her own ears. "That shouldn't have mattered." Maria's voice rose sharply. "She was a pregnant woman sitting alone, and you humiliated her because of what? Because she's black? Because she looked successful? What possible justification could you have?" Ashley opened her mouth to respond, but found no words. What could she possibly say? That she'd been tired? Bitter? Jealous? That watching happy, successful people triggered something dark and resentful inside her? None of it would make sense to anyone who hadn't been drowning in her particular brand of misery. The kitchen door swung open, and 2 uniformed officers from the Jamaica Constabulary Force entered, their presence immediately commanding silence. "Ashley Tedford?" the senior officer asked, though his eyes had already found her. "That's me," Ashley said, her voice coming out hoarse. "We need to ask you some questions about an incident that occurred this evening involving Mrs. Amber Robinson." As the officer spoke, Ashley caught sight of her reflection in the steel refrigerator door. Wine-stained uniform, mascara smudged from sweat, her face pale with dawning comprehension. She looked like exactly what she was, someone who'd just destroyed her own life in 37 seconds of crystallized hatred. The questions were methodical, thorough, damning. Yes, she'd poured wine on Mrs. Robinson deliberately. Yes, she'd made comments about Mrs. Robinson's suitability for the establishment. No, there was no provocation. No, Mrs. Robinson hadn't done anything to warrant such treatment. With each admission, Ashley watched her co-workers' faces grow more distant, more disgusted. By the time the officers finished taking statements and left with promises of follow-up, it was nearly midnight. The restaurant had finally closed, and Ashley was escorted out through the service entrance to avoid the crowd of protesters that had gathered at the front. But even from the back alley, she could hear them chanting, "Justice for Amber! Fire the racist! Justice for Amber!" Ashley pulled her jacket tighter and hurried toward the bus stop, head down, tears finally streaming freely. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, hate messages, death threats, people she'd never met telling her she deserved to rot in hell. Maybe they were right. By the time she reached her apartment at 1:30 a.m., exhausted and emotionally shattered, the video had been viewed over 200,000 times. Every major news outlet in Jamaica had covered it. International Caribbean media was picking up the story. Her face was everywhere, immortalized in the worst moment of her life. And somewhere across the city, in the governor's residence, decisions were being made that would reshape her entire existence. Ashley Tedford had humiliated the governor's wife. Now, she would learn what it meant to face the full weight of consequences. The sun hadn't yet risen over Kingston when Tony James sat in the governor's private conference room, surrounded by 3 officers from the governor's security unit and 2 investigators from the Jamaica Constabulary Force's Special Investigations Branch. Spread across the mahogany table were printed documents, digital tablets displaying social media archives, employment records, and a timeline of Ashley Tedford's life mapped out with military precision. Governor Nathaniel Robinson stood at the head of the table, impeccably dressed in a crisp white shirt and navy slacks despite the 5:47 a.m. hour. His face was unreadable, the same expression he'd worn during hurricane emergency briefings and national security briefings. Calm, controlled, absolutely lethal. "Walk me through it," he said quietly. Captain Devon Harris, a 15-year veteran of investigative work, cleared his throat and pulled up the first file on the central display screen. Ashley Tedford's employment photo from the Velvet Palm appeared, professional smile, hair neatly pulled back, the image of hospitality service excellence. It was jarring compared to the twisted face of cruelty captured in the viral video. Ashley Marie Tedford, age 27, Canadian citizen, resident in Jamaica for 5 years on a work permit. Currently, Harris corrected himself, formerly employed as senior server at the Velvet Palm. Terminated last night at 10:43 p.m. Employment history, Nathaniel's voice remained eerily level. 2 years at the Velvet Palm. Before that, 18 months at the Coral Reef Resort in Montego Bay, left under unclear circumstances. Before that, various hospitality positions in the Ocho Rios area. Harris pulled up another document. "Sir, we've been conducting interviews with former co-workers and managers. There's a pattern." Nathaniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Show me." The screen filled with incident reports, some official, most informal notes from human resources files that the investigators had acquired through proper channels, and perhaps a few improper ones that no one would question given the circumstances. March 2024. Coral Reef Resort. Customer complaint regarding dismissive and borderline discriminatory treatment from server Ashley Tedford. Customer was Jamaican. Complaint not formally pursued after Tedford issued written apology. August 2024. The Velvet Palm. Verbal warning issued to Ashley Tedford for unprofessional comments made to guests. Details sealed in personnel file. November 2024. The Velvet Palm. Second customer complaint. The family reported feeling targeted and unwelcome due to Tedford's service. Management response: additional training required. January 2025. The Velvet Palm. Assistant Manager Keisha Williams notes in internal memo, concerned about AT's pattern of behavior towards certain clientele. Recommend monitoring. There are 11 documented incidents over 18 months, Harris said grimly. And these are just the ones that were reported. Based on our interviews from last night and this morning, there were likely dozens more that customers didn't bother to formalize. Tony James spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of personal failure. She's been doing this for a year and a half, and management did nothing substantive to stop it. Written warnings and training that clearly accomplished nothing. The Velvet Palm's management bears responsibility, Nathaniel agreed, his tone sharpening, which brings us to corporate oversight. Captain Harris? The Velvet Palm is owned by Caribbean Luxury Holdings, registered in Barbados. The general manager is Richard Thornton. He's been with the company for 8 years. According to our preliminary findings, Thornton was aware of at least 6 of the complaints, but characterized them as customer service issues rather than discrimination. Find me everything on Thornton, Nathaniel said. Employment contracts, performance reviews, any correspondence regarding these complaints. I want to know if this pattern of negligence extends beyond Tedford. Already in progress, sir. Nathaniel turned to Lieutenant Grace Morgan, head of his security detail's investigative arm. Social media analysis? Morgan pulled up several screenshots on her tablet and projected them onto the main screen. Sir, Tedford's social media presence is enlightening. She's careful. No outright slurs or explicitly racist content. But the pattern is clear once you know what to look for. The screen filled with Ashley's Facebook posts from the past year. Another day. Another entitled customer who thinks service workers are beneath them. Some people need to remember where they came from. Service industry life. Posted 3 hours after a formal complaint from a Jamaican family. Interesting how the loudest complaints always come from the same type of people. Just saying. Posted the day after her verbal warning. Merit should matter more than quotas. Qualified people are being passed over, and it's disgusting. Posted 2 days after Keisha Williams received the assistant manager promotion. She uses coded language, Morgan explained. Dog whistles. Nothing explicitly racist enough to be actioned by social media platforms, but the subtext is unmistakable when cross-referenced with the dates of actual incidents. Tony James leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across the table. She's been harboring these prejudices for months, maybe years, and the Velvet Palm gave her a platform to act on them with minimal consequences. Mrs. Robinson wasn't the first victim. She was just the most visible. And the last, Nathaniel said with quiet finality. What's the status of the Velvet Palm? Harris consulted his notes. As of 6:00 a.m. this morning, the Ministry of Health will be conducting an unscheduled comprehensive inspection of the premises, standard procedure following any incident that raises public health or safety concerns. Given the nature of the assault, which involved food service contamination and potential health risks to a pregnant patron, the inspection will be particularly thorough. Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but everyone in the room understood what particularly thorough meant. The Velvet Palm would be under a microscope, and no restaurant, no matter how prestigious, could survive that level of scrutiny without discovering multiple violations. The Labor Ministry will also be reviewing the Velvet Palm's employment practices, specifically regarding discrimination prevention, staff training protocols, and complaint resolution procedures, Morgan added. That review was requested by the ministry this morning following widespread public concern about workplace discrimination. "And the Jamaica Tourist Board?" Nathaniel asked. "Already notified of the incident," Harris confirmed. "They're opening an investigation into whether the Velvet Palm's handling of discrimination complaints violates tourism industry standards. The restaurant's 5-star certification is under review." It was surgical, precise. Each agency acting within its legal authority, each investigation justified by legitimate public interest. Yet the cumulative effect would be devastating. The Velvet Palm wasn't just facing bad publicity. It was facing systematic dismantling through bureaucratic channels that would take months to navigate even if they had done nothing wrong. And they had done something wrong. They'd enabled Ashley Tedford's pattern of discrimination for 18 months. "What about Tedford herself?" Nathaniel asked, his voice dropping even lower. "She's at her apartment in Meadowbrook," Tony reported. As of 5:30 a.m., there were approximately 40 protesters outside her building. Media vans from every major outlet. Her phone has been ringing continuously since midnight. We estimate over 300 calls, most of them threatening. Her internet search history shows she's been looking up immigration procedures and legal representation. Her father? David Tedford, age 63, diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He's her primary dependent. She's listed as his sole caregiver on his medical records. Tony's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. His medication costs run about $3,200 JMD monthly. Without her income... Nathaniel was silent for a long moment, and everyone in the room felt the weight of that silence. The governor was a father himself now, or would be in 3 months. He understood the complexity of family obligation, the way love could coexist with a person's worst actions. But he also understood that consequences couldn't be negotiated away because they were inconvenient. "Ensure that Mr. Tedford's medical care continues uninterrupted," Nathaniel finally said. "I will not punish an ill man for his daughter's choices. Contact the Ministry of Health and verify that he has access to all prescribed medications through government assistance programs if necessary." "Sir?" Harris looked surprised. "You heard me, Captain. David Tedford has done nothing wrong. His daughter's actions are not his responsibility." Nathaniel's gaze hardened. "But Ashley Tedford will face every consequence she has earned through her own deliberate choices." He walked to the window overlooking King's House Gardens, hands clasped behind his back. Dawn was breaking over Kingston, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Those colors again, wine and light intertwined. "Here's what happens next," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying the absolute authority of his office. "The investigations proceed by the book. No shortcuts, no extrajudicial actions, no vigilante justice. Every agency operates within its legal mandate. If violations are found, they're prosecuted appropriately. If the Velvet Palm maintained discriminatory employment practices, they face the full legal consequences. If Ashley Tedford committed assault, which the video evidence clearly shows, she faces criminal charges. The Crown Prosecutor's Office is reviewing the case this morning," Harris confirmed. "Given the video evidence and multiple witness statements, they're confident they can pursue assault charges." "Ensure they have everything they need," Nathaniel said. "But, Captain, I want to be absolutely clear. This investigation must be unimpeachable, transparent, by the book. The moment this becomes about my personal vendetta, rather than legitimate justice, we lose the moral authority to act." "Understood, sir." Nathaniel turned back to face the room. "My wife was humiliated, assaulted, and discriminated against in a public space. But she wasn't the first victim. and if we don't act decisively, she won't be the last. This is about sending a message to every establishment in Jamaica that discrimination will not be tolerated, that enablement of discriminatory behavior has consequences, and that no one, regardless of their position or power, is exempt from basic human dignity. He paused, and something flickered across his face. Not quite satisfaction, but grim determination. Let justice be thorough. By noon, the Velvet Palm's doors were sealed with official Ministry of Health notices citing critical health and safety violations requiring immediate remediation. The inspection had uncovered expired food storage, improper refrigeration temperature logs, and inadequate sanitation in food preparation areas, violations that had likely existed for months but had suddenly become visible under intensive scrutiny. By 2:00 p.m., General Manager Richard Thornton submitted his resignation effective immediately, citing personal reasons. His carefully worded statement made no mention of the 11 discrimination complaints he'd failed to address adequately. By 4:00 p.m., Caribbean Luxury Holdings issued a public statement expressing profound regret and announcing a comprehensive review of discrimination policies across all their properties. And by 6:00 p.m., Ashley Tedford's apartment was surrounded by so many protesters and media crews that police had to establish a perimeter just to maintain public safety. Inside apartment 3B, Ashley sat on her worn couch with her father, watching their lives disintegrate in real time on every news channel. The Velvet Palm remains closed tonight as inspections continue. Criminal charges expected to be filed within 48 hours. Calls for immigration review of Tedford's work permit status. David Tedford's hands trembled worse than usual. Whether from Parkinson's or from stress, Ashley couldn't tell anymore. He looked at her with confusion and pain, struggling to understand how his daughter had become the villain in a national news story. "Ashley," he rasped, his voice weakened by disease. "What?" She had no answer that would satisfy him. No explanation that would make sense to a man who'd taught her that everyone deserved respect, that service work was honorable, that cruelty was the mark of a small soul. "I don't know, Dad," she whispered. "I don't know who I became." Her phone buzzed again, the 700th message of the day. This one was from a number she didn't recognize. "You're going to prison, racist bitch." Hope it was worth it. Ashley silenced the phone and held her father's shaking hand, understanding with crystal clarity that the worst was still to come. Somewhere across the city, in offices with power she'd never comprehend, the invisible machinery of consequence was just beginning to turn. And there was no stopping it now. 72 hours after the incident, Ashley's landlord stood in her doorway with a legal document and an expression of carefully practiced neutrality that couldn't quite hide his disgust. "Notice of eviction," Mr. Chen said, extending the papers without stepping inside. 30 days as required by law, but, given the circumstances, I'd appreciate if you could vacate sooner. Ashley took the papers with numb fingers. The words swam before her eyes. Breach of community standards, bringing disrepute to the property, harassment of other tenants. Harassment? Ashley's voice came out hoarse from 3 days of crying. "I haven't harassed anyone." "Your presence is harassment," Mr. Chen said flatly. "The other tenants are afraid. Mrs. Palmer on the second floor received death threats because someone thought she was you. The protesters outside are disrupting everyone's lives. I have 18 other families to consider, Miss Tedford." He gestured to the window where, 3 stories below, the crowd had actually grown. What had started as 40 protesters was now over 100, their chants drifting up through the glass. No home for hate. No home for hate! Where am I supposed to go? Ashley whispered, though she already knew the answer didn't matter. My father is sick. He can't be moved easily. That's not my problem. Mr. Chen's voice softened slightly, but his resolve didn't waver. I'm sorry about your father. Truly. But you made your choices. And now you're making mine. 30 days, Miss Tedford, or I'll begin formal eviction proceedings. The door closed with a quiet click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. Ashley stood in her cramped living room, soon to be her former living room, and felt the walls closing in. The apartment had never been much. 900 square feet of worn carpet, a kitchen with appliances that predated her arrival, a bathroom where the shower leaked. But it had been hers. Safe. Home. Now it was just another thing she'd lost. She looked at the eviction notice again, seeing for the first time the date it was filed, the morning after the incident. Mr. Chen hadn't waited for investigations or due process. He'd seen the video like everyone else and made his decision immediately. In the bedroom, David Tedford slept fitfully, his breathing labored, his body ravaged by Parkinson's and by the stress that had accelerated his decline over the past 3 days. The doctor had warned Ashley during their last visit that stress was dangerous for someone in David's condition, that it could trigger complications neither of them could afford. Ashley had nodded and promised to maintain a calm environment. 24 hours later, she'd humiliated the governor's wife on camera and turned their lives into a national scandal. Day 5 brought the interview rejections. Ashley had spent the previous evening applying to every hospitality position within 50 miles. Restaurants, hotels, resorts, even fast food chains. She'd swallowed her pride and crafted applications that emphasized her experience while carefully omitting her most recent employment termination. But in the age of viral videos, there was nowhere to hide. The first rejection came via email at 8:17 a.m. Thank you for your interest in the hostess position at Sunrise Cafe. Unfortunately, we've decided to pursue other candidates whose qualifications better match our establishment's values. The second came at 9:43 a.m. We regret to inform you that the server position has been filled. By noon, Ashley had received 14 rejections. Some were polite and vague. Others were brutally direct. We cannot employ someone with your documented history of discriminatory behavior. She called the manager at a small family restaurant in Spanish Town who'd seemed interested when they'd spoken the day before he'd apparently learned who she was. Mr. Patterson, this is Ashley Tedford. I applied for the... I know who you are. His voice was cold. And no, we won't be moving forward with your application. Please, I just need a chance to... Miss Tedford, I have a daughter about your age. She's Jamaican. When I watched that video, I imagined someone treating her that way, and it made me sick to my stomach. So no, I will not be giving you a job. I suggest you try somewhere far away from here. The line went dead. Ashley set down her phone and stared at her laptop screen, at the dozens of job postings she'd bookmarked, and felt something inside her finally break. It wasn't just that she'd lost her job. She'd lost her entire future. Her name had become synonymous with racism and cruelty. Every Google search returned the video. Every potential employer saw her face before they saw her qualifications. She was unemployable. The realization settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Without income, she couldn't afford rent. Not that it mattered since she was being evicted anyway. She couldn't afford her father's medications. She couldn't afford food. The savings account she'd been building for emergencies had $847 Jamaican dollars. enough for maybe 1 week of expenses if they were extraordinarily careful. Ashley opened her phone and scrolled through her contacts, looking for someone, anyone, who might help. Friends she'd made during her early years in Jamaica, co-workers from previous positions, even casual acquaintances. She started with Rachel, a server she'd worked with at the Coral Reef Resort. They'd been close once, grabbing drinks after shifts, complaining about difficult customers. The call went straight to voicemail. Ashley tried texting. "Hey, it's Ashley. I know you've probably seen the news. I really need to talk to someone. Please, call me back." No response. She tried Marcus, a bartender she'd dated briefly last year. Same result, straight to voicemail, no callback. One by one, Ashley worked through her contact list, sending messages that grew increasingly desperate. "I know I messed up, but I really need help. Please, I just need someone to talk to. I can't do this alone." The silence was deafening. By evening, only one person had responded, her former roommate from hospitality school, Sarah, who lived in Toronto. "Ashley, I saw what you did. I can't believe you became that person. Please don't contact me again." They had all ghosted her. Every single one. The friendships she'd thought were real had evaporated the moment she became toxic by association. Ashley sat in the darkness of her apartment. She'd stopped turning on lights to save electricity, and understood that she was truly alone. No job, no home, no friends, nothing but her dying father and the wreckage of her own making. Day 8 brought the stroke. Ashley had been in the kitchen trying to stretch their remaining groceries into something resembling a meal when she heard the crash from the bedroom. She ran in to find her father collapsed beside the bed, his right side slack, his face drooping, his eyes wide with terror he couldn't articulate. "Dad! Oh God! Dad! Hold on!" The ambulance ride to Kingston Public Hospital was a blur of sirens and prayers. Emergency room nurses who recognized Ashley from the news treated David with professional competence, but regarded her with barely concealed contempt. She didn't care. Let them hate her. Just save him. 3 hours later, a doctor emerged with news that shattered what little remained of Ashley's composure. "Mr. Tedford suffered an ischemic stroke," Dr. Morrison explained, her voice clinically detached. "We've stabilized him, but there's been significant damage to the left side of his brain. He'll require extensive rehabilitation, ongoing medication, and 24-hour care for the foreseeable future." "What does that mean?" Ashley asked, though she already knew. "It means he can't live independently. He'll need a care facility or constant home supervision. His current medications will need to be supplemented with additional prescriptions." Dr. Morrison consulted her tablet. "The estimated cost for rehabilitation and care, how much?" "Approximately $180,000 Jamaican dollars for the first 3 months, assuming no complications." Ashley felt the floor tilt beneath her. $180,000. She had $847, no job, no prospects, and a father who now needed more care than ever. "I can't afford that," Ashley whispered. "There are government assistance programs, but the application process can take weeks, sometimes months." Dr. Morrison's expression softened fractionally. "Miss Tedford, I'm going to be frank with you. Your father's prognosis was already poor due to his Parkinson's. This stroke, combined with the stress of recent events, has significantly accelerated his decline." The implication hung heavy in the antiseptic air. "You did this to him." Ashley nodded mechanically, unable to speak past the crushing guilt. That night, she sat beside her father's hospital bed watching him sleep with his face slack on one side, his right hand lying motionless on the blanket. The man who'd raised her alone after her mother left, who'd supported her dreams of hospitality management, who'd moved to a foreign country just to be with her, she'd destroyed him. Not directly, not intentionally, but destroyed him nonetheless through her own choices, her own cruelty, her own festering resentment that had finally erupted in a moment of devastating consequence. "I'm so sorry," Ashley whispered. Taking his left hand, the one that could still weakly squeeze back. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I never meant for any of this to happen." But that was a lie, wasn't it? She had meant to hurt someone that night at the Velvet Palm. She'd wanted to humiliate Amber Robinson, to cut her down, to make her feel as small and powerless as Ashley felt every single day. She'd just never imagined what the cost would be. Day 12 brought the desperate late-night scrolling. Ashley couldn't afford internet anymore, but the hospital had Wi-Fi, and she spent her nights beside her father's bed compulsively checking news feeds. The story had finally started to fade from front-page headlines, replaced by political scandals and hurricane preparations. But it still lingered in editorial columns and social media discussions about discrimination, privilege, and justice. And in every article, every discussion, every analysis, one name appeared with unwavering dignity: Amber Robinson. Ashley found herself obsessively searching for statements from the First Lady, waiting for the angry condemnation she knew she deserved. But there was nothing. Amber had released only one brief statement through the governor's office the day after the incident. "I appreciate the support of the Jamaican people during this difficult time. I believe in the power of our legal system to address this matter appropriately. My focus now is on my health and my family." That was it. 28 words. No calls for vengeance. No press conferences. No inflammatory statements. Just quiet dignity. The silence was somehow worse than any condemnation could have been. Ashley scrolled through photos of Amber at a pediatric hospital charity event 3 days ago, her smile warm despite the fading stains on her reputation. She found videos of Amber at a women's entrepreneurship summit, speaking about resilience and grace. She discovered article after article praising the First Lady's composure, her refusal to engage in vindictive rhetoric, her commitment to letting justice proceed without personal interference. "Why won't she just say something?" Ashley whispered to her sleeping father, her voice breaking. "Why won't she yell at me? Call me what I am. Tell everyone how much she hates me?" But even as the words left her mouth, Ashley understood. Amber Robinson didn't need to say anything. Her grace had already spoken louder than any rage ever could. Her silence was its own eloquent statement. "You are not worth my anger. You are not worth my time. You are not worth diminishing myself to your level." And that realization, that she'd been so thoroughly dismissed through simple dignity, hurt worse than any lawsuit, any criminal charge, any public condemnation. Because it meant Ashley didn't even register as a worthy opponent. She was simply a lesson in what not to become. Ashley set down her phone and buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Beside her, her father's monitors beeped steadily, tracking the life she'd helped ruin through her own corroded soul. Somewhere across Kingston, in King's house, Amber Robinson was probably sleeping peacefully. Protected, loved, moving forward with her life while Ashley drowned in consequences. And the worst part? It was exactly what Ashley deserved. But knowing you deserve suffering doesn't make it hurt any less. It just makes it impossible to escape. Day 14 began with a newspaper that changed everything. Ashley sat in the hospital cafeteria at 6:47 a.m., nursing a cup of coffee she couldn't afford but desperately needed. She'd spent another sleepless night in the chair beside her father's bed, listening to his labored breathing and the relentless beeping of monitors tracking his fragile stability. The cafeteria was nearly empty at this hour, just a few exhausted doctors finishing night shifts and a janitor mopping the far corner with methodical precision. Someone had left a copy of the Jamaica Gleaner on the table, folded open to the editorial section. Ashley almost ignored it. She'd stopped reading news about herself because each article felt like a fresh wound. But a headline caught her eye. The Quiet Philanthropy of Jamaica's First Lady. Amber Robinson's Legacy of Service Before the Spotlight. Ashley's hands trembled as she pulled the newspaper closer. The article was written by a veteran columnist named Patricia Morgan, known for her deeply researched profiles of Jamaican public figures. It wasn't about the incident. It was about Amber's life before becoming First Lady. Long before Amber Robinson became Jamaica's First Lady, she was simply Amber Chen, a successful financial consultant who'd made her fortune advising Caribbean businesses on investment strategies. But what few people knew was how she chose to spend that fortune. Amber never wanted recognition, says Dr. Michael Thompson, director of the Kingston Veterans Medical Fund. She would donate quietly, often anonymously, and specifically requested that her contributions not be publicized. She felt that charity done for recognition wasn't true charity. Between 2019 and 2023, before her marriage to then-Colonel Nathaniel Robinson, Amber donated over $4.5 million JMD to various medical funds across Jamaica. Her largest contribution? Nearly $2 million to the Veterans Medical Assistance Program, a fund that provides medication and treatment to former military personnel and their families who cannot afford care. Ashley's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. The Veterans Medical Assistance Program. The name ricocheted through her memory like a bullet. No, it couldn't be. That fund saved lives, Dr. Thompson continues. We were able to provide medications for Parkinson's patients, cancer treatments, cardiac care, services that would have been completely inaccessible otherwise. Amber's donation kept the program operational during its most critical years. The newspaper began to shake in Ashley's hands. 3 years ago, when her father's Parkinson's had first been diagnosed and the medication costs had seemed impossible, the social worker at Kingston Public Hospital had told Ashley about a special assistance program. It's for veterans and their families, the woman had explained. Your father's service in the Canadian Armed Forces qualifies him. The application process is simple, and if approved, most of his medication costs will be covered. Ashley had been skeptical. Government programs were usually slow, bureaucratic nightmares. But within 2 weeks, the approval had come through. David Tedford's monthly medication costs dropped from $3,200 to $400. The program covered his primary Parkinson's medications, his blood pressure prescriptions, even some of his physical therapy sessions. It's a miracle, David had said, tears in his eyes. I thought I'd be a burden, Ashley. I thought you'd have to choose between your life and my care. But this program, it's given us both a chance. For 2 years, that program had been their lifeline. It had allowed Ashley to work reasonable hours instead of triple shifts. It had meant David could afford the medications that kept his symptoms manageable. It had been the difference between survival and catastrophe. And Amber Robinson, the woman Ashley had humiliated with wine and venom, had funded it. Ashley read the article 3 more times, her vision blurring with tears, searching for some mistake, some misinterpretation. But the facts were undeniable. The dates matched. The program description was exact. Even the monetary amount aligned with what the social worker had mentioned about a major private donation that had secured the fund's future. Amber Robinson had saved David Tedford's life, and Ashley had repaid that mercy by pouring wine on her head and telling her she didn't belong. The newspaper slipped from Ashley's numb fingers and fluttered to the floor. Around her, the cafeteria continued its morning routine. Doctors ordered breakfast. The janitor's mop squeaked across linoleum. The coffee machine hissed. But Ashley heard none of it. She was drowning in a revelation so devastating that it physically hurt, like her chest was being crushed by the sheer weight of what she'd done. She stumbled from the cafeteria, leaving her coffee abandoned, and ran to the nearest bathroom. She barely made it to a stall before her stomach rebelled, purging nothing but bile and guilt. She retched until her body had nothing left to give, then collapsed against the cold tile wall, gasping. "I hurt her," Ashley whispered to the empty bathroom. "I hurt the woman who saved my father's life. I hurt her. And I didn't even know." But would it have mattered if she'd known? That was the question that made Ashley's self-loathing complete. If she'd somehow discovered that Amber Robinson had funded veterans' medical care, would she still have poured that wine? Would her resentment and bitterness have overwhelmed even that knowledge? Ashley wanted to believe she would have stopped, but she couldn't be sure. And that uncertainty was perhaps the most damning indictment of who she'd become. That evening, Ashley sat beside her father's hospital bed as twilight painted Kingston in shades of purple and gold. David was awake, but foggy. His speech still slurred from the stroke, his comprehension coming and going like radio signals, fading in and out. "Dad," Ashley said softly, taking his functioning left hand in both of hers. "I need to tell you something." David's eyes focused on her with effort. "Ashley, do you remember the medical program that paid for your Parkinson's medications? The Veterans Assistance Fund?" A slow nod. "Miracle." "It wasn't a miracle, Dad. It was a woman named Amber Robinson. She donated the money that funded the entire program. She's the reason you could afford your medications for 2 years. She's the reason you didn't have to suffer. She saved your life." David's face registered confusion, trying to connect pieces his damaged brain couldn't quite assemble. Ashley's voice broke. "And she's the woman I poured wine on, Dad. The governor's wife. The pregnant woman I humiliated in front of everyone." Tears streamed down Ashley's face, hot and unstoppable. "I hurt the woman who helped you live. I destroyed the person who showed us mercy when we needed it most." Understanding slowly dawned in David's eyes. Not complete understanding, perhaps, but enough to register the terrible irony, the cosmic injustice of what his daughter had done. "No," he whispered, the word barely intelligible. "Because I'm broken," Ashley sobbed, lowering her forehead to their joined hands. "Because I let bitterness poison everything good in me. Because I became someone I don't even recognize anymore." They sat in silence, broken only by monitor beeps and Ashley's quiet crying. Outside the window, Kingston's lights began to flicker on, the city transitioning from day to night, oblivious to the private devastation unfolding in room 412. "I don't know how to fix this," Ashley whispered. "I don't know if it can be fixed, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I've become." for what I did to the woman who saved you." David's thumb moved weakly against her hand, the only comfort he could offer in his diminished state. It was more than Ashley deserved. She stayed there, kneeling beside his bed like a penitent in confession. Until the night shift, nurses came to check vitals and gently suggested she try to get some sleep in the visitors' lounge. Ashley didn't sleep. She couldn't. The revelation had stripped away every defense mechanism, every rationalization, every fragment of self-justification she'd been clinging to. There was no hiding from what she'd done, no explaining it away. She had become precisely the kind of person she'd once despised. The envelope arrived at 8:23 a.m. the next morning. Ashley was half dozing in the chair beside her father's bed when Nurse Patterson entered, her expression unreadable. She held a cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering that caught the morning sunlight streaming through the window. "This was delivered to the front desk," Nurse Patterson said, her tone carefully neutral. "It's addressed to you." Ashley took the envelope with trembling hands. The weight of it suggested expensive paper, the kind used for formal occasions and official correspondence. The embossing on the front made her breath catch. From the office of the governor of Jamaica. Her heart began to pound so violently she could feel it in her throat. This was it. The criminal charges, the lawsuit, the official condemnation she'd been dreading and deserving. Ashley's hands shook so badly she could barely break the wax seal. Inside was a single card, heavy stock, with elegant calligraphy. "Mrs. Amber Robinson requests your presence at King's House, October 18th, 2025. 10:00 a.m., Office of the First Lady. This is not a legal summons. This is an invitation. You may decline without consequence." Ashley read it 3 times, searching for the threat she knew must be hidden somewhere in the formal language. But there was nothing, just a simple invitation with no explanation, no context, no indication of what awaited her at King's House. "What does it say?" Nurse Patterson asked, curiosity finally breaking through her professional detachment. "She wants to see me," Ashley whispered. "The governor's wife. She wants to meet with me." "Are you going to go?" The question hung in the air between them. Ashley looked at her father, still sleeping, his face slack on one side, his breathing assisted by oxygen tubes, the living consequence of her choices. Then she looked back at the invitation, at Amber Robinson's name written in gold ink. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to decline the invitation, pack what little she had left, and disappear to another parish, another island, another country where no one knew her face. She could change her name, start over, pretend the last 2 weeks had never happened. But running wouldn't change what she'd done. It wouldn't erase the video, wouldn't undo the humiliation, wouldn't restore her father's health or her own shattered soul. And somewhere deep beneath the fear and shame, Ashley felt something else stirring, a desperate, fragile hope that maybe, somehow, this invitation represented a chance, not for redemption, because she knew she didn't deserve that, but perhaps for understanding, for closure, for looking the woman she'd wronged in the eye and acknowledging the full weight of her actions. "Yes," Ashley said quietly, folding the invitation with careful precision. "I'm going." Because whatever awaited her at King's House, judgment, condemnation, or something she couldn't yet imagine, she owed Amber Robinson at least this much: the courage to face her. October 18th arrived with cruel sunshine, the kind of perfect Caribbean morning that seemed to mock Ashley's internal devastation. She stood outside the gates of King's House at 9:43 a.m., staring up at the magnificent colonial structure that served as the governor's official residence and office, her entire body trembling with a terror so profound it felt like her bones might shatter. The invitation was clutched in her sweating palm, already wrinkled from 3 days of constant handling. She'd read it approximately 200 times, searching for courage in those elegant words that refused to appear. You may decline without consequence. But there would be consequences, just different ones. The consequence of cowardice, of running from the one person she owed truth and accountability, of living the rest of her life knowing she'd been too weak to face what she'd done. A security guard approached the gate, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes recognizing her immediately. Everyone recognized her now. Name? Ashley Tedford. I have an appointment with Mrs. Robinson at 10. He consulted his tablet, then nodded slowly. You're expected. I'll need to check your belongings and conduct a security scan. The process was thorough and humiliating. Bag searched, metal detector, pat down by a female officer who performed her duties with mechanical efficiency. Ashley endured it all in silence, understanding that this was nothing compared to what awaited her inside. Finally, she was cleared and escorted up the sweeping driveway by a different guard, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes that somehow made Ashley feel worse. Kindness was harder to face than contempt. First time at King's House? The guard asked conversationally. Yes. It's beautiful inside. The architecture is 18th century, but Mrs. Robinson has added some lovely modern touches. She has excellent taste. Ashley's throat constricted. Even here, even now, people spoke of Amber Robinson with warmth and respect. The woman had earned genuine affection, while Ashley had earned only infamy. They entered through massive mahogany doors into a foyer that took Ashley's breath away. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers that fractured sunlight into rainbow prisms. Original artwork adorned the walls. Vibrant Jamaican landscapes, historical portraits, contemporary pieces that bridged tradition and modernity. This was power, real power, the kind Ashley had never comprehended until this moment, standing in its physical manifestation. This way, the guard said gently, leading Ashley down a corridor lined with photographs of previous governors and their families. At the end of the hall stood another set of doors, these more modest but somehow more intimidating. A brass plaque read, Office of the First Lady. The guard knocked twice, then opened the door. Miss Tedford to see Mrs. Robinson. Send her in. That voice, cultured, calm, carrying an authority that needed no volume, made Ashley's legs nearly give out. She forced herself forward, crossing the threshold into a spacious office decorated in cream and gold tones. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens. Built-in bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on policy, social justice, and Caribbean history. And behind an elegant desk sat Amber Robinson. She was even more beautiful in person than in photographs. Radiant in a flowing coral maternity dress, her natural hair styled in elegant twists, diamond studs catching the light. Her pregnancy was more visible now at nearly 8 months, her hand resting protectively on her belly. But it was her eyes that captured Ashley's attention. Dark, intelligent, and completely unreadable. To Amber's right, standing like a sentinel, was Tony James. The massive bodyguard's expression was carved from granite. His hands clasped in front of him, every muscle in his body suggesting coiled violence held in perfect check. His eyes tracked Ashley's every movement with predatory focus. Miss Tedford, Amber said, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. "Please sit." Ashley's legs barely carried her to the chair. She collapsed into it gracelessly, unable to control her shaking, unable to meet Amber's gaze. The invitation crumpled in her fist, felt like the only solid thing in a world that had gone liquid and unstable. "Thank you for coming," Amber continued, her tone polite, as if this were a normal business meeting rather than a confrontation between victim and perpetrator. "I'm sure this wasn't easy." Ashley opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her entire vocabulary had deserted her. Amber waited patiently, hands folded on her desk, giving Ashley time to compose herself. The silence stretched, 10 seconds, 20, 30, until it became unbearable. "I'm sorry," Ashley finally choked out, the words pathetically inadequate. "I'm so sorry." "For what, specifically?" Amber's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath the silk. "I'd like you to articulate exactly what you're apologizing for." Ashley's breath came in ragged gasps. "For pouring wine on you. For the things I said, for humiliating you in front of everyone, for—" Her voice broke. "For attacking you when you were pregnant and vulnerable and just waiting for your husband. For being cruel when you'd done nothing to deserve it." "I didn't do nothing," Amber corrected quietly. "I existed while black and successful in a space where you'd decided I didn't belong. That was my crime in your eyes, wasn't it?" The words hit like physical blows. Ashley nodded miserably, tears streaming down her face. "Look at me," Amber commanded, her voice still calm but carrying an authority that made Ashley's head snap up involuntarily. Their eyes met, and Ashley saw the full weight of what she'd done reflected back at her. "You didn't just pour wine on me that night, Miss Tedford. You poured it on every woman who's ever been told she doesn't belong. Every black woman who's had to prove her worth twice over. Every pregnant woman who's been made to feel less than human. Every person who's walked into a room and faced hatred for simply existing." Ashley sobbed openly now, her shoulders shaking. "I know. God help me. I know." "Do you?" Amber leaned forward slightly, her hand still protective on her belly. "Do you truly understand what you did? Because I need you to comprehend this fully. When you attacked me, my daughter stopped moving for 3 full minutes. 3 minutes where I thought your cruelty had cost my child her life. Do you understand that level of terror? That helplessness?" "I'm sorry," Ashley whispered again, the only words she had left. "I read about the medical fund, about how you saved my father's life with your donation to the Veterans Assistance Program. You gave us years we wouldn't have had, and I repaid that mercy by—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Something flickered across Amber's face, surprise, perhaps, that Ashley had made the connection. "I didn't donate to that program for recognition or gratitude. I did it because it was right. Because people's health shouldn't depend on their bank accounts. Because everyone deserves dignity and care. Everyone except people like me," Ashley said bitterly. "I don't deserve your mercy." "No," Amber agreed, and the blunt honesty was more painful than any condemnation. "You don't. But that's not how mercy works, Miss Tedford. Mercy isn't about deserving. It's about choosing grace over vengeance, even when vengeance would be justified." The office door opened, and Governor Nathaniel Robinson entered. Ashley's heart stopped. She tried to stand, to show respect, but her legs wouldn't support her. The governor was even more imposing in person, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, moving with military precision. His face was composed, but his eyes carried a coldness that made Tony James look warm by comparison. "Miss Tedford," he said, his voice perfectly modulated, but carrying enough edge to draw blood. "I'm glad you accepted my wife's invitation." "Sir, Ashley's voice failed completely. Nathaniel walked to stand beside Amber's chair, one hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture of both solidarity and protection. "My wife asked me not to press criminal assault charges against you. Did you know that?" Ashley shook her head, unable to speak. She intervened with the Crown Prosecutor's office, convinced them that criminal prosecution would only prolong her trauma and turn her pain into public spectacle. His jaw tightened. "I disagreed, vehemently. I wanted to see you prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I wanted your work permit revoked and you deported back to Canada. I wanted every consequence that could legally be brought against you to rain down until you understood the magnitude of what you'd done." Each word landed like a hammer blows. Ashley gripped the arms of her chair to keep from sliding to the floor. "But my wife," Nathaniel continued, his voice softening fractionally as he looked down at Amber, "is a better person than I am. She believes in redemption, in second chances, in the possibility that even people who commit terrible acts can change if given the opportunity." His gaze swung back to Ashley, hardening again. "I remain skeptical, but I love and respect my wife enough to honor her wishes." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a document, sliding it across the desk toward Ashley. "This is a work placement order with the Robinson Women's Trust, a charitable organization my wife founded that provides support services to disadvantaged women and families across Jamaica." Ashley stared at the document through blurred vision, unable to process what she was seeing. "You will work for the trust for 1 year, Nathaniel stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Full-time hours. You'll receive a modest stipend, enough to cover basic expenses and your father's care. You'll assist with food distribution, job training programs, maternal health services, and crisis intervention. You'll work directly with the women you've spent years looking down upon." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Understand this, Miss Tedford. You came seconds from losing more than your job. You came seconds from losing your freedom, your future, everything. The only reason you're sitting in this chair instead of a jail cell is because my wife possesses a capacity for mercy that I do not share." Ashley's hands trembled as she picked up the document. Through her tears, she could see the official letterhead, the terms of employment, the signature line waiting for her agreement. "This isn't forgiveness," Amber said quietly. "You haven't earned that, and you may never earn it. This is an opportunity to rebuild what you destroyed, not for us, but for yourself. To become someone who deserves the second chance you're being given." Ashley looked up at Amber through streaming tears, seeing the woman she'd attacked now offering her salvation. The irony was crushing. The grace was incomprehensible. "Why?" Ashley whispered. "After everything I did, why would you help me?" Amber's hand moved in gentle circles over her belly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Because someone showed me grace once, when I needed it most. And because I refused to let your hatred make me hateful. You tried to diminish me, Miss Tedford, but I will not be diminished. I will respond to your cruelty with the one thing you'll never take from me: my humanity." The silence that followed was sacred, broken only by Ashley's quiet sobs and the distant sound of Kingston traffic beyond the windows. Finally, Tony James spoke for the first time, his deep voice rumbling through the room. Sign the paper or walk away. Those are your choices. But if you sign it, understand that you will work harder than you've ever worked in your life. You will face people who hate you. You will hear their stories and feel the weight of your own prejudice every single day. And if you fail, if you show even a hint of the person who attacked Mrs. B. Robinson, I will personally ensure you face every consequence we've so far withheld. Ashley picked up the pen with shaking hands. She looked at the document, at the signature line, at the impossible grace being offered to someone who deserved only justice. And then she signed. Not because she deserved this chance, but because Amber Robinson, in her infinite dignity, had decided to give it anyway. "Thank you," Ashley whispered, though the words felt microscopic compared to the gift she'd received. "I won't waste this. I swear, I won't waste this." Amber nodded once, regal and unmoved. "See that you don't. You start Monday. Report to the trust offices at 8 a.m. Someone will be there to show you what real service looks like." Ashley stood on trembling legs, clutching the signed document like a lifeline. As she turned toward the door, Amber's voice stopped her. "Miss Tedford, one more thing." Ashley turned back. "When you hurt me, you didn't break me. Remember that. And when this year is over, when you've done the work, maybe you'll understand why breaking someone was never the victory you thought it would be." Ashley nodded, unable to speak past the emotion lodged in her throat, and walked out of King's house, carrying both her shame and her salvation in equal measure. Behind her, in that elegant office, Amber Robinson placed both hands on her belly and took a deep, steadying breath. The first moment she'd allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd just done. Mercy wasn't weakness, but God, it was exhausting. The Robinson Women's Trust occupied a renovated colonial building in downtown Kingston, its pale yellow walls and green shutters a beacon of hope in a neighborhood that desperately needed it. Ashley arrived at 7:42 a.m. on her first Monday, 18 minutes early, because she couldn't bear the thought of being late, couldn't risk squandering this impossible second chance. She stood outside the entrance, staring at the brass plaque beside the door. The Robinson Women's Trust, empowering women, strengthening families, building community. Beneath it, smaller text, founded by Amber Chen Robinson, 22. Even before becoming First Lady, Amber had been building something meaningful. While Ashley had been nurturing bitterness, Amber had been nurturing hope. The door opened, and a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked locks and kind but wary eyes appeared. "You must be Ashley Tedford." "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Gloria Patterson, Operations Director." She didn't offer her hand. "Come in. We have a lot to cover, and the first food distribution starts at 9. Ashley followed Gloria inside, immediately struck by the warmth of the space. The walls were painted in soft yellows and blues, covered with children's artwork and photographs of smiling women. A community bulletin board advertised job training classes, prenatal care services, and financial literacy workshops. The air smelled of fresh coffee and something baking, bread, maybe, or muffins. But as Ashley entered the main common room, conversation stopped. A dozen women turned to look at her, and the recognition in their eyes was instant and damning. "That's her," someone whispered. "The one from the video." Gloria's voice cut through the tension with practiced authority. "Ladies, this is Ashley. She'll be working with us for the next year. I expect you to treat her with the same respect we extend to everyone who walks through these doors." A meaningful pause. "The same respect Mrs. Robinson would want us to show." The invocation of Amber's name had power. The women didn't smile, didn't welcome Ashley, but they returned to their conversations with an agreement to suspend judgment. For now. "Your station is in the back," Gloria said, leading Ashley through the common room toward the kitchen. "You'll start with food distribution prep. We serve breakfast to about 80 women and children every morning, plus bag lunches for those who need them. Tuesdays and Thursdays, you'll assist with job training workshops. Fridays, you'll help at the maternity care clinic we run in partnership with Kingston Public Hospital." Ashley's old workplace. The irony wasn't lost on her. "I need to be clear about something," Gloria continued, stopping in the kitchen doorway. Her voice was low but firm. "I watched that video. I saw what you did to Mrs. Robinson. That woman is like a daughter to me. I've known her since before she met the governor, watched her build this trust from nothing, seen the lives she's changed. So understand that you're here because she wants you here, not because I do." "I understand," Ashley said quietly. "Do you?" Gloria's eyes searched Ashley's face. "Because grace isn't the same as trust, Miss Tedford. Grace is what Mrs. Robinson gave you. Trust is what you'll have to earn from the rest of us. And it won't be easy. I don't expect it to be." Gloria nodded slowly, some of the hardness softening. "Good. Now wash your hands and put on an apron. The breakfast crowd arrives in 45 minutes, and we've got work to do." The first 3 weeks were brutal. Ashley worked harder than she'd ever worked at the Velvet Palm, but physical exhaustion was nothing compared to the emotional gauntlet she faced daily. Women who came to the Trust for Services knew exactly who she was. Some refused to let her serve them food. Others accepted her help in stony silence, their disgust palpable. A few were openly hostile. "I don't want her touching my plate," one woman said on Ashley's 5th day, pushing away the breakfast tray Ashley had prepared. "I don't trust racist hands near my food." Ashley had stood there, tray trembling in her grip, fighting back tears as Gloria quietly stepped in and delivered the meal herself. Afterward, in the kitchen, Gloria had said simply, "You'll face worse. Can you handle it?" "I have to," Ashley had replied. And she did, because every hostile glare was deserved. Every whispered comment about that woman was justified. Every moment of discomfort was a fraction of what she'd inflicted on Amber Robinson in 37 seconds of crystallized hatred. But slowly, painfully, incrementally, things began to shift. Ashley learned the names of the women who came for services, learned their stories, listened when they talked about eviction notices and sick children, about jobs lost and partners who'd disappeared, about trying to maintain dignity while drowning in circumstances beyond their control. She met Carmen, a 43-year-old former hotel worker who'd been fired after developing arthritis that made carrying trays impossible. "I gave 20 years to that resort," Carmen said, while Ashley helped her fill out disability applications. "And they let me go like I was nothing." Ashley thought about her own termination from the Velvet Palm. Swift, final, justified. But at least she'd brought it on herself. Carmen had only committed the crime of getting older, of her body betraying her. She met Pauline, whose husband had emptied their bank account and vanished, leaving her with 3 children and rent she couldn't pay. "I kept thinking he'd come back," Pauline admitted during a financial literacy workshop. "Kept making excuses for him. Now I realize I was the only one fighting for my family." Ashley saw herself in Pauline's misplaced loyalty, not to a partner, but to her own bitterness. She'd clung to resentment like it was precious, let it empty her of everything good, and only realized the cost when it was almost too late. By week 6, some women began to thaw. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acknowledgement that Ashley was showing up, doing the work, not hiding from the consequences of her actions. "You're different than I expected," Carmen said one afternoon while they organized donated clothes. "I thought you'd be arrogant, defensive, but you just listen." "I'm trying to learn," Ashley said honestly. "I'm trying to understand who I became and how to be better." "That's more than most people do," Carmen replied. "Most folks make mistakes and just move on without looking back. You're actually doing the hard work of changing." The words were a small grace, but they meant everything. In week 8, Ashley met Marcia. She was 22, 8 months pregnant, and utterly alone. Her partner had left when she refused to terminate the pregnancy, and her family had disowned her for getting pregnant outside marriage. She'd arrived at the trust with nothing but the clothes she wore, and a desperation that reminded Ashley painfully of herself. "I don't know how to do this," Marcia said during intake, her hands protectively cradling her belly. "I have no money, no job, nowhere to live. How am I supposed to bring a baby into this?" Ashley saw Amber Robinson in Marcia's frightened determination, saw the same protective hand on the belly, the same fierce love for an unborn child, the same refusal to break, despite impossible circumstances. "You're stronger than you think," Ashley heard herself say. "And you're not alone anymore." Over the following weeks, Ashley became Marcia's unofficial advocate. She helped her apply for government assistance, accompanied her to prenatal appointments at Kingston Public Hospital, taught her basic budgeting and childcare skills. When Marcia broke down crying about her fears of labor and motherhood, Ashley sat with her for hours, just listening, offering the presence she'd once denied others. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Marcia asked one evening at the Trust's overnight shelter where she'd been given temporary housing. "Everyone says you're the woman who attacked the governor's wife. Says you hate people like me." Ashley's throat tightened. "I did hate. I hated successful people, happy people, people who seemed to have easier lives than mine. And that hatred made me cruel." She looked at Marcia directly. "But you know what I learned? Hatred doesn't make you powerful. It makes you empty. And I was so empty that I hurt someone who'd only shown kindness to people like us." "People like us?" "People who are struggling. People who need help. Mrs. Robinson funded the medical program that saved my father's life. She built this trust to help women exactly like you. Like both of us." Ashley's voice cracked. "And I attacked her because I couldn't stand seeing someone black and successful and dignified, because her existence reminded me of my own failures." Marcia was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think people can really change?" "I don't know," Ashley admitted, "but I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying to become someone better than who I was." "And I guess we're both trying," Marcia said, her hand moving over her belly. "Trying to be better than we were, trying to give our children a different world." 3 months into Ashley's placement, on a quiet Tuesday evening after the last workshop had ended, and most volunteers had gone home, Ashley was cleaning the common room when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and froze. Amber Robinson stood in the doorway, 9 months pregnant now, radiant in a simple blue dress. No security detail, no entourage. Just the First Lady visiting her trust quietly, like she'd done countless times before. Ashley had ever heard her name. Ashley's first instinct was to run. Her second was to apologize again, to prostrate herself, to somehow convey the magnitude of her remorse. But she did neither. She simply stood there, dish rag in hand, and waited. Amber walked slowly into the room, her hand supporting her lower back, in the universal gesture of late pregnancy discomfort. She looked around at the clean tables, the organized bulletin board, the children's artwork carefully displayed. "Gloria tells me you've been working hard," Amber said quietly. "I'm trying, ma'am." "She also tells me about Marcia, how you've been helping her prepare for motherhood." Amber's hand moved to her own belly. "That's good work, important work. It's the least I can do." Amber turned to look at Ashley fully, and for the first time since the incident, her expression held something other than controlled composure. It held exhaustion, vulnerability, and perhaps the faintest thread of hope. "Do you understand now?" Amber asked. "Why I built this place?" Ashley nodded, tears beginning to fall. "Because everyone deserves dignity. Everyone deserves help when they're struggling. Everyone deserves a second chance. Like you're getting." "Like I'm getting," Ashley whispered. "A chance I don't deserve, but that you gave anyway." Amber was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching Ashley's face for something, sincerity perhaps, or genuine transformation rather than performed penitence. "Keep going," Amber finally said, her voice soft but carrying unshakable conviction. "Real change isn't loud, Miss Tedford. It's not dramatic confessions or grand gestures. It's lived, day after day after day. It's showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. It's choosing empathy over ego, service over self-interest, grace over grudges." She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "My daughter will be born in 2 weeks. I want her to grow up in a Jamaica where people like you choose to change rather than cling to hatred, where second chances lead to real transformation, where mercy isn't wasted." "I won't waste it," Ashley said, her voice breaking. "I swear to you, I won't waste it." Amber nodded once, not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. Then she was gone, leaving Ashley alone in the common room with the weight of expectation and the gift of possibility. Ashley sank into a chair and finally let herself cry, not from shame this time, but from something that felt dangerously close to hope. She was changing, slowly, painfully, but genuinely. The bitter, resentful woman who'd poured wine on a pregnant stranger was dying, and in her place, someone new was being born. Someone who understood that true power wasn't found in tearing others down, but in lifting them up. Someone who knew that service was the highest form of strength. Someone who'd learned that mercy, when accepted with humility, could transform hatred into love. The work wasn't finished. It might never be finished. But for the first time since that terrible night at the Velvet Palm, Ashley believed she might actually deserve the life she'd been given. And that belief, fragile as it was, felt like redemption beginning to take root. 6 months had changed everything and nothing. The Velvet Palm had reopened in March under new management. Caribbean Luxury Holdings had sold the property to a Jamaican hospitality group committed to inclusive excellence and cultural sensitivity. According to their press releases, the entire staff had been retrained. New policies were implemented. The restaurant that had been the site of Ashley's greatest shame had been transformed into something better than it was before. Ashley stood outside on a humid April evening, staring up at the familiar facade now adorned with Jamaican flags and warm lighting that made the building glow like a beacon. She'd been invited here tonight not as staff, but as the guest coordinator for the Robinson Women's Trust, a role she'd earned through 7 months of relentless work, genuine transformation, and the kind of humility that only comes from being completely broken and painstakingly rebuilt. Tonight's event was a charity christening celebration for Nathaniel Grace Robinson, the governor's daughter, born 3 months ago to a nation that had celebrated her arrival with the same intensity they'd condemned Ashley's attack. The baby's middle name, Grace, had not been lost on anyone who'd followed the story. "You ready for this?" Gloria Patterson appeared beside Ashley, elegant in a deep purple gown, her silver locks styled into an intricate updo. Over the past months, Gloria had evolved from skeptical supervisor to cautious mentor to something resembling a friend. "I don't know," Ashley admitted honestly. She wore a simple black dress, appropriate for staff, modest enough not to draw attention, professional enough to honor the significance of the evening. Her hair was pulled back neatly, minimal makeup, small pearl earrings her mother had sent from Toronto as a tentative gesture of reconciliation. "Being back here feels surreal." "You're not the same person who worked here," Gloria said firmly. "Remember that. You're here because you've earned it. Because Mrs. Robinson believes in the work you've done." Ashley nodded, clutching her tablet with the evening's coordination notes. She'd been responsible for liaising between the trust and the restaurant's new management, ensuring that proceeds from tonight's dinner would fund the trust's new teen mother support program, an initiative Ashley had helped design based on her work with Marcia and dozens of other young women. Marcia had given birth to a healthy baby girl 2 months ago. She'd named her Hope. Ashley had been in the delivery room, coaching her through labor, and had wept when Marcia asked her to be Hope's godmother. "You helped me believe I could do this," Marcia had said. "You saved us." The irony was almost too much to bear. Ashley saving anyone when she'd come so close to destroying everything. "Let's go inside," Gloria said gently. "The guests will start arriving soon." Ashley took a deep breath and walked through the doors she'd been escorted out of 7 months ago in disgrace. The velvet palm had been transformed for tonight's event. The dining room glowed with candlelight and flowers, orchids and anthuriums in shades of white and gold. Round tables draped in ivory linens bore place settings that looked like art. The infamous chandelier still hung overhead. But now it seemed to cast light differently, warmer, more forgiving, as if even the architecture understood this was a night of redemption rather than humiliation. Ashley worked with quiet efficiency, checking table arrangements, coordinating with servers, ensuring every detail aligned with Amber's vision for an evening that would raise funds while celebrating new life and second chances. Guests began arriving at 7:00 p.m. Kingston's social elite, government officials, international dignitaries, and, notably, dozens of women from the trust. Gloria had insisted on that. If this dinner is about grace and transformation, then the women who've benefited from Mrs. Robinson's work need to be here, not just the rich people writing checks. Ashley watched Carmen arrive in a borrowed evening gown, her arthritic hands carefully steadied by her daughter, watched Pauline enter with her 3 children, all dressed in their finest, eyes wide at the elegance surrounding them, watched Marcia walk in carrying baby Hope, both mother and child symbols of survival and hope. And at 7:29 p.m., almost exactly the same time Ashley had committed her unforgivable act, Governor Nathaniel Robinson and First Lady Amber Robinson arrived. Amber was breathtaking. She wore a flowing gold gown that complemented her radiant post-pregnancy glow. Her natural hair styled in elegant curls, diamond jewelry catching the chandelier light. In her arms, wrapped in white lace, was tiny Nathaniel Grace, 3 months old, sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the significance of this evening. The governor stood beside his wife, one hand protectively on her back, his expression proud and tender as he looked at his family. Tony James followed 2 steps behind, now holding his own daughter, born just weeks after Grace. Even the stoic bodyguard had softened into fatherhood. Ashley stayed in the background, coordinating silently, making sure everything flowed smoothly. She avoided looking directly at Amber, afraid that meeting those eyes would shatter the fragile composure she'd built. The dinner proceeded beautifully. Speeches were given praising the Trust's work. A video presentation showed the lives changed through Amber's quiet philanthropy. Women who'd found jobs, mothers who'd received prenatal care, families who'd been housed and fed and given dignity when the world had stripped it away. Ashley appeared in one brief clip, filmed at the Trust 3 weeks ago. Speaking about her work with teen mothers, "I've learned that service isn't about feeling good about yourself. It's about making yourself useful to people who need you, even when, especially when, you don't deserve their acceptance." The audience had applauded. Ashley, watching from her coordination post near the kitchen, had felt tears threatening and forced them back. Not here. Not now. At 9:47 p.m., as the dinner wound down and guests mingled over coffee and dessert, Ashley was reviewing final details with the restaurant manager when she felt a presence beside her. She turned and found Amber Robinson standing there, baby Grace sleeping against her shoulder, the First Lady's expression unreadable but not unkind. "Mrs. Robinson," Ashley said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is everything satisfactory?" "If there's anything that needs, everything is perfect," Amber interrupted gently. "You did excellent work coordinating this evening." "Thank you, ma'am." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, victim and perpetrator, grace giver and grace receiver. 2 women forever bound by one terrible moment and its aftermath. "I wanted to tell you something," Amber said quietly, adjusting Grace's blanket with the unconscious care of new motherhood. "Gloria shared your proposal for the Teen Mother Program. The curriculum you designed, the support structure, the partnership with Kingston Public Hospital. It's exceptional work, Ashley." The sound of her first name, not Miss Tedford, but Ashley, made her breath catch. "I've learned from the best," Ashley said, her eyes finally meeting Amber's. "From you, from Gloria, from the women who've taught me what strength and dignity actually look like." Amber smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Ashley had ever seen directed at her. "I'm naming you Assistant Director of the program. It launches in June. Gloria will supervise, but the day-to-day operations will be yours." Ashley's legs nearly gave out. I don't understand. I'm still serving my placement year, which ends in 3 weeks," Amber pointed out. "And then what? Did you think we'd just let you go after all the work you've put in? After the lives you've touched?" She shifted Grace to her other shoulder. "The Trust needs people who understand brokenness and healing from the inside out. People who've walked through their own transformation and can guide others through theirs." Tears finally spilled down Ashley's cheeks. "Mrs. Robinson, I can't possibly thank you enough. Not for this, not for giving me a second chance when I deserved nothing, not for—" Her voice broke completely. "For saving you?" Amber finished quietly. Ashley nodded, unable to speak. "You said something in your interview video that struck me," Amber continued. "You said service isn't about feeling good about yourself. But Ashley, you're wrong about one thing. You do deserve acceptance. Not because of who you were, but because of who you've chosen to become." "You saved me twice," Ashley whispered through her tears. "Once when you funded my father's medical care without ever knowing us. And again, when you gave me grace instead of the punishment I deserved." Amber was quiet for a long moment, looking down at her sleeping daughter, then back at Ashley. "Can I tell you a secret? Something I've never said publicly?" Ashley nodded. "That night at this restaurant, after you poured wine on me, I wanted revenge. I wanted to watch you suffer. I wanted to use every bit of power and influence I had to destroy you completely." Amber's voice remained soft, but Ashley could hear the truth in it. "I'm not naturally merciful, Ashley. I'm human. I was angry and hurt and humiliated. The grace I showed you, it wasn't easy. It cost me something." "Then why?" Ashley asked desperately. "Why show mercy when rage would have been justified?" Amber looked around the restaurant, at the women from the trust laughing with government ministers, at Carmen dancing with her daughter, at Marcia showing baby hope to anyone who'd look, at the transformation that had bloomed from one terrible night. "Because sometimes grace is the only justice worth giving," Amber said simply. "Punishment would have satisfied my anger for a moment, but grace that demands accountability and transformation, that creates something lasting. It breaks cycles instead of perpetuating them. It builds up instead of tearing down. It plants seeds of change that can grow into forests." She gently touched Ashley's arm, the first time she'd initiated physical contact since the attack. "You were my seed of change, Ashley, planted in pain, watered with mercy, growing into something that will help hundreds of other women find their own redemption. That's justice that matters." Ashley couldn't stop crying now. 7 months of guilt, transformation, and hope poured out of her in a flood of tears that felt like both grief and rebirth. Amber didn't move away. She simply stood there, holding her sleeping daughter, bearing witness to Ashley's emotional release with the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout this entire journey. "Thank you," Ashley finally managed to whisper. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." "Then keep paying it forward," Amber said. "Help other women see their worth. Show them that mistakes don't define us. Our responses to those mistakes do. Teach them that grace received must become grace given." A photographer from the Jamaica Gleaner approached tentatively. "Mrs. Robinson, I'd love to get a photo if you're willing." Amber glanced at Ashley, a question in her eyes. Ashley understood immediately what was being asked. Was she ready for this moment to be public? For the image of victim and perpetrator standing together to become part of the narrative? She nodded. "Yes, please." They stood together beneath the same chandelier where Ashley's cruelty had been captured on video 7 months ago, but this time there was no wine, no humiliation, no hatred, just 2 women who'd been through fire and emerged transformed, one through the grace she'd given, the other through the grace she'd received. "Could you shake hands?" the photographer suggested. Amber adjusted baby Grace, then extended her hand. Ashley took it, feeling the warmth of human connection, the physical manifestation of forgiveness beginning to take root. Cameras flashed. The moment was captured. Amber Robinson, radiant and dignified, and Ashley Tedford, tear-stained but hopeful, hands clasped beneath golden light. A sleeping baby between them representing new beginnings and second chances. The next morning's Jamaica Gleaner featured the photo on the front page above the headline, "From Disgrace to Grace, the Waitress Who Found Redemption." The article told the full story: the attack, the aftermath, the unlikely mercy, the transformation. It featured interviews with women from the Trust who spoke about Ashley's tireless work. Gloria's quote ran in bold. "She came to us as punishment and stayed as purpose. That's what real change looks like. But it was the final paragraph that captured the essence of what had transpired. In a world that demands vengeance, First Lady Amber Robinson chose grace. In response, Ashley Tedford chose transformation. Their story reminds us that justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about planting seeds of change in broken soil and watching redemption bloom. As Mrs. Robinson stated at last night's charity dinner, grace is costly, but hate is more expensive. I choose grace. Ashley read the article in her father's hospital room, where David Tedford was slowly, painfully recovering from his stroke. His speech was improving, his mobility returning incrementally through intensive therapy. Therapy funded by the governor's office through their Veterans Support Program. "Proud of you," David managed to say, his words still slurred but comprehensible. "Knew you were in there, somewhere." Ashley took his hand, understanding that he'd seen glimpses of her better self, even when she couldn't. "I'm going to keep making you proud, Dad." Every single day. Through the hospital window, Kingston spread out beneath a brilliant morning sky, the same city where she'd committed her worst act and found her salvation. The same streets where she'd lost everything and gained something infinitely more valuable. A purpose beyond herself. A life of meaning. A future built on grace, rather than resentment. 7 months ago, Ashley Tedford had been a bitter waitress who poured wine on a pregnant woman to feel powerful for 37 seconds. Today, she was assistant director of a program that would help hundreds of young mothers find hope in their darkest moments. The transformation wasn't complete. Ashley suspected it never would be. She still woke with shame some mornings, still had moments where the weight of what she'd done threatened to crush her. Still saw the video in her nightmares, but she also woke with purpose, with work that mattered, with women who depended on her, and a child who called her godmother, and a mentor who believed in her capacity for continued growth. Most importantly, she woke with gratitude for a grace she hadn't deserved but had been given anyway by a woman who understood that mercy could be more transformative than revenge. In the end, Amber Robinson had been right about everything. Real change wasn't loud, it was lived. Justice wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about redemption. And grace, when given to broken people willing to rebuild themselves, could create miracles. Ashley folded the newspaper carefully, pressed it flat like a sacred text, and placed it in her bag to keep forever. Not as a reminder of her shame, but as proof that even in our darkest moments, when we've become our worst selves, transformation remains possible. If someone is willing to show us grace, and if we're willing to do the hard work of becoming worthy of it. Outside, Kingston continued its chaotic, beautiful dance. Inside room 412, a father and daughter sat together in comfortable silence, both of them healing, both of them grateful, both of them living proof that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won through power or punishment. They're won through the quiet courage of choosing grace over hatred, mercy over vengeance, and redemption over revenge. And that, Ashley thought as she squeezed her father's hand, was the only justice that truly mattered. Mercy is power perfected through compassion.